Dad suggested, in an effort to help other people who are on this journey, that I talk about Mom's final days, so you understand what the end of the process looked like. And this is the first time I've really felt like doing that. But she had been on a path for a couple of weeks of eating less and less, staying awake less and less. And the final couple days, she was not eating very much at all. We were blending up food and giving it with an eyedropper. And she was eating very little, very little. So we were on about day 5, without really eating or drinking that much. We could encourage, but you can't force because you don't want them to aspirate. And that's part of the end of the process. So you don't want to not feed them because she can't feed herself, but you encourage, you try to help her eat something. And so I had an early morning meeting out of the house. When I got back, we had a temporary caregiver filling in. Dina was on vacation, and through a referral of someone that helps us on the weekend, they gave us a referral to a great person who was very experienced in memory care and end of life. She was kind of semi-retired. And so we had great care. Even though Dina was gone, we did have great care that week, which was a blessing to us. But Dad and Mary had gotten Mom changed and up. And they told me, well, they got her changed. They didn't get her up. Hospice was coming that morning at 10:30 or so as part of their weekly checkup. But she had some internal bleeding in her diaper that morning from the GI tract, which, it could have been something, a signal towards the end, or organs shutting down, that type of thing. So hospice came and checked her out, and we all agreed, there's really nothing to do for that because you'd have to go to the hospital and have that investigated, and she wouldn't tolerate any of those tests, nor would we want to put her through that. So we knew we were, perhaps dealing with a new issue with the internal bleeding. There was a lot in the diaper that morning. And so hospice checked her out, and we got her up. And Mary was beginning to try to feed her some breakfast and some liquid with the dropper and such. And I liked to get Dad out of the house so that he had a break. And so I knew that Mom would not be awake very long that day. So I said to him, I said, come on, let's go to lunch now quickly. And then we're back. And that way, if we need to put her in bed early, we're here to help with that process. So we went out for a very quick lunch, came right back. And when we got back, Mary was about to start putting Mom back in bed by herself. And she said, I need help. She's in distress. And she was almost hyperventilating. She was very cold and clammy. She was shaking. It just was a very stressful, you could tell. Mom didn't suffer very much with this disease, but that afternoon she did. That was the only time she suffered with the disease. And so my brother was coming that evening after work. And so I immediately texted him and said, come now. And he said he was on his way. And so we put her back in bed and we changed her. And there was a lot of blood from the internal bleeding. So she was very much in distress. We called hospice. They came back and we started morphine. So that was the first time. A lot of people say, oh, you start hospice and you're on morphine. We'd been on hospice since March. We had not touched morphine. Morphine comes into play when the person has pain or when they're in distress breathing. And she was both, very much so. So she said, you can tell by her face, she's grimacing. We need to start the morphine. So we began the morphine that evening. And she had a total of 3 doses. She had 2 doses while Dad and I were still up in the evening. And then I prepared a dose in the dropper, and we went to bed, and I left it for Dad. And I said, if you wake up and she's still struggling breathing, she was very much doing what is commonly called the death rattle when she went to sleep. She was, gurgling and struggling to breathe. And so Dad woke up around 4 a.m. to use the bathroom, and he heard her still struggling to breathe. And so it had been enough time. He gave her with the dropper another dose of the morphine, and then he laid back down and he did not go back to sleep. And close to 5 a.m., he heard her stop breathing. And so he got up and checked her, and then he woke me up and said, Josh, I think she's gone. And I came down and checked her out, and indeed, I felt the same thing. She was gone. We called hospice, and they sent a nurse. And Dad and I assisted the nurse in changing her one last time. It was a little morbid to change her after she passed, but it was also, we'd taken care of her for so long. It was a nice send off. We took care of her one last time. And so we cleaned her up, changed her, and, got her, let the hospice nurse, we left the room and the hospice nurse prepared her for the funeral home to come. And they came in the morning. Our pastor came, the funeral home came, and things progressed from there. So that was an early Friday morning. So if she suffered at all, it was a few hours Thursday evening. She, began to really struggle to breathe and had whatever internal bleeding thing was happening that was just most likely some form of the end of the life. So we wanted to share that journey, not to be morbid, but just so people understand what it looks like. It was very peaceful, and all things considered, we were here to be with her. She didn't suffer very much. That's the blessing in the whole thing. She's finally at peace. And so that's just the way that went down. We hadn't really talked about that other than with our close friends and things. But we wanted everybody to understand, because we've heard from so many people. There's so many people on this journey that sadly you're headed that way. And you always know it's coming, but it's going to be shocking and upsetting when it happens. But you can always have the peace knowing that mom's at peace again and not suffering anymore with that horrible brain disease that just must be awful to live inside that head. So thank you for allowing me to share the story. We're going to continue to share more about our caregiving journey and things about Alzheimer's, because we want to continue to help people understand. It's taken us a little bit of a break before we've, felt ready to talk about this scenario. But with time, we heal. We're working through the grieving process, and that's where we are now. So thank you for following our journey.